So this is the refuge prayer that you've got, and it's quite traditional to repeat this prayer 3 times. It's only short, 4 lines, before a Buddhist teaching. And the reason for that is because what we're talking about here is not just special. Not just special. So special means not a worldly subject. But this is not just special, this is the most special subject, because this actually came from a fully enlightened Buddha, not a bodhisattva, even if it had come from a bodhisattva, it would be a wonderful thing. But this came from even higher than a bodhisattva, the ultimate of beings, the highly fully enlightened Buddha himself is the basis of all the Buddha Dharma in all the universes, not just this world. And so it's a vast ocean of wisdom and the path to the ultimate truth. And so out of respect, we say this prayer, we repeat this prayer. And the other thing I wanted to say about that was that how can I put it? It's not just wisdom as in worldly wisdom like a theory. Buddha actually taught from his own experience, and also people also think, it's not very well known, people think that Buddha attained enlightenment for the first time in this life. He started off as a normal human being and he attained enlightenment. That's not the case at all. The Buddha is quite difficult. The reason I think they allow that to be known or thought of is because to explain what actually happened is incredibly deep and complicated. But basically, I'll try to explain it very simply. Lord Buddha took many, many rebirths as a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is an aspiring Buddha, and in those final stages, much merit must be accumulated, and there's a lot of subtle obscurations and blockages that must be removed from the mind to attain that absolute highest state, the supreme state of enlightenment. There are many other types of enlightenment, lower enlightenments or liberations before the full enlightenment, and if any of us could attain the lowest one of those, it would be amazing. Absolutely mind-blowingly amazing. All problems, all worry, all fear, all anxiety, all sufferings will end immediately. And that stage is called the first bhumi. And there are 10 bhumis or 11, let's say 10 bhumis to the threshold of full enlightenment, and 11 is the full enlightenment. So, but if we can get to the first one, then it's just too much, really. It's amazing everything that will happen to the mind, and your ability to help others, and your understanding of reality. And again, the main thing is the freedom from all sufferings, especially any type of anxiety, fear, or self-concern. So this is what we're aiming for. Our aspiration is for the first bhumi. To aspire to full enlightenment is wonderful, and to wish full enlightenment for all beings, wonderful. But pragmatically, the first bhumi would be more than enough for us. I'll give you one example of one of the many qualities, well, 2 of the many qualities of the first bhumi is 100% full clairvoyance, 100%. So it's not contaminated clairvoyance like the medium. It's literally. It's vast, and you know everything about everyone, and therefore you make a wonderful teacher, because you can help you know what people's delusions are, you know what obstructions, blockages, and defilements are actually affecting each individual being that you meet. And then secondly, it's going to sound a bit crazy, so you have to bear with me, but you can appear in 100 different places at once. You can teach in 100 different places at once. That's just the first bhumi. And that appearances, what we call luminous appearance of teaching, is multiplied by 10 with each boomi as you go up. But anyway, these are all, it's a long way off for us. To start with, this prayer is a way of remembering that all this wisdom, all the ocean of teachings of the Buddha came from this fully enlightened Buddha, and that we shouldn't just steal it. Because what a lot of people are doing nowadays, they are learning the Dharma and then they are teaching it as if it's their own theory or their own word, and that's very, very disrespectful, obviously. And I can't mention the karma involved from that, but let's just say that one should always remember that these teachings came from a fully enlightened Buddha and they're not worldly theory. Prayer hands as a Buddhist is you form them like a lotus, so the fingers are bent slightly at the top and the thumbs go inside so that there's not an empty cavity, it's got something inside it. If you want to do this, you don't have to. And then you can just follow the words as I say it, or you've got the translation there, and you can take this piece of paper home. Sangye Jodan Sogye Jodama Chanchu Pado Dani Asenje Dagen Jiso Gebe Sanama Dola Penche Sangye To Ashu Sangye Jodan Sogye Jodama Chanchu Pado Dani Asenje Dagen Jiso Gebe Sanama Dola Penche Sangye To Ashu Sangye Jodan Sogye Jodama Chanchu Pado Dani Asenje Dagen Jiso Gebe Sanama Dolar Penche Sangye Tu Pasho. So, the Buddhist practice is an internal practice. We're very much distracted by our external life. When I say we, I mean our minds. The Buddhist path is a mind practice. And so you watch your mind and see what it does. That because of our mind, we experience the suffering. Because of our mind, we experience anger. Because of our mind, we experience jealousy. Because of our mind, we experience pride. Pride is the big problem. And the symptom of pride is, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. The first truth is the truth of suffering. The second truth is the truth of craving. But the Sanskrit word for craving is trishna. Trishna is actually, funnily enough, where the English word thirst comes from. So the cause of suffering, the second noble truth, the cause of suffering is thirst. And this thirst, it just means wanting. Wanting something. All the time we want something. We're driven by wanting, and it's an external drive. We never want something inside. We never want good qualities in our mind. We never want a clearer mind, a purer mind. We want things, we want to gain. And the gaining idea, the root of the gaining, comes from the idea of a self, separate self. And a separate self comes from, well, actually, complicated. We've got 8 consciousnesses in our mind. Our mind is divided into 8 consciousnesses. And one of those consciousnesses is called the afflictive mind. And the afflictive mind, or the afflictive consciousness, is just there, has developed over time, and we're talking about a long time, since beginning this time, in all of us, in all beings. The afflictive mind has developed to produce, solely for one purpose, to produce the idea of a separate, independent self, separate from anyone else. And yet it's a completely developed, produced, deluded consciousness. It's not real. The truth is, we're not all separate. The truth is, we're all the same. You can see it. If you just check, you can see that we're all born from each other. All of us have parents. None of us suddenly appeared without parents. We're all born from each other. I think even Darwin would agree with that. Every being has got parents, and those parents have got parents, and those parents have got parents. So we're born as babies. And when we're babies, we've kind of got no identity. We've got this basic idea of a separate self. We've got this sense of self. That's all we've got, a sense of self. Every time we're born, we've got a sense of self. Now, where do I go from here? Let's stick to the worldly version at the moment. So the initial baby has got a sense of self, but no idea of identity. And this identity, the reason I'm talking about identity is because Buddha said that the identity is the cause of the self, the sense of self is the cause of the identity, and both working together create this wheel where we just keep going round and round. The self imputes the identity imputes the self, and this together builds what we call a character or a person who wants things, needs things. Obviously we've got survival needs, so that feeds the self as well. But all the time, all these external activities, all these external wants and needs, survival, is causing the mind to strengthen, drive, increase, cultivate, generate the self, the personal identity even more. And so the situation gets worse and worse. We become more and more separate from everything else. We've got our own independent existence. The mind is becoming more and more selfish. And and in the end, we are in a concentric cage of ego, of self, of protectionism, isolationist. And we no longer care about anyone else. The mind is completely infatuated with the self. And yet none of it is true. The actual truth is the mind is shared by all beings, and it's actually pure in its core. But we've now coated it with this idea of a dual relationship between self and others. Once through the appearances, the afflictive motion imputes a self. And upon that self, it imputes, on the appearances of others, it imputes others that are not the self. And that is where all the problems in this world come from, selfishness. If we get rid of that, if we can purify our mind, the Buddha's teaching is the sacred Dharma of the Buddha. And every Buddha, since beginning this time, is that if we can purify that poison in the mind, that afflictive consciousness, which falsely imputes an individual, independent, inherently existent self, if we can purify that from the mind, we can realise that we're all absolutely equal. Now, the second part of the problem. The second part of the problem is, once we've realised that there's no self, which is difficult because obviously we've got very, very strong proclivities and propensities of self and habits that go back a long way. I don't know how many of you understand rebirth, but we've been born many, many, many times before, and those have left imprints on our mind, those lives, and in those lives we've been treated badly, let's say, at the very least. And those events have left a terrible imprint on our mind, and our mind is wary of others. In that, there's not, like I said, there's 8 consciousnesses. There's the afflictive consciousness, but there's also a consciousness that remembers propensities and carries the karma from past lives. So as well as the consciousness that imputes the self, we've also got a mind that carries, how could you call it, imprints and sort of like memories of, they're sort of instinctive fears which have been so driven into our mind through abuse. And I'll be honest, we've been born as animals so many times, and we've been attacked by other animals so many times. That fear of death and suffering is deeply ingrained in our mind at the moment. So the reason why the Buddha appears is for that very reason. All the saints, or bodhisattvas, all the Buddhas, all religions actually are there specifically to remove all the negatives from our minds, our hearts. but the Buddha's teachings do go all the way to full enlightenment, and those teachings are still available completely and untainted and unchanged since the Buddha's time. And also there are many other great masters who have given teachings. The Buddha's teachings are called sutras, and the great Buddhist masters that have followed in the last 2,500 years, if they're authentic, genuine, realised masters, then their teachings are called the shastras, and they are also treated in the Tibetan canon just as sacred, just as high as the Buddha's teachings, because there's some wonderful information. But all of this information, and it goes into the most specific detail, you can learn everything. You can learn who we are, why we are, where we are, why we are here, what it is that we are receiving, the senses, what it does to the mind, everything, absolutely, the whole reality, the explanation of reality without any exception. There's nothing left out, if you can handle it. But whether it's, the Buddha said, try not to get wrapped up in all the details too much. There's some very intricate, you can find out everything from the Buddhist teachings. But the Buddha said there's no need to go into all that detail. The main thing is to remove the poison from your mind. He said, the analogy he gave was, you've been shot by a poison arrow, and you just need to get the arrow with the poison and the poison out of your body, out of your mind. You don't need to know what wood the arrow was made of. You don't need to know what direction it came from. You don't need to know the name, who shot the arrow. You don't need to know how long the bow was. It's all these details. So you can learn all these details from the Buddha's teachings and the Tibetan canon, but try to stick to the ones that are most beneficial, that are going to help you to get to liberation, to realise selflessness, to destroy the ego, to become the kindest, best person that you can.